In 1964, a small family-run shop in San Diego released a folding knife that would change American culture forever. The Buck Model A110 Folding Hunter became the best-selling sporting knife in history. A tool so perfectly designed that it turned a modest manufacturer into an empire. By the 1980s, Buck Knives wasn't just a company, it was the knife. The Model A110 was so dominant that people stopped saying pocket knife, they said Buck Knife. Like Kleenex, like Xerox, the brand had transcended the product. For 4 generations, the Buck family had built something rare, a genuinely American manufacturing dynasty. Their blades were in the pockets of hunters tracking elk in Montana, soldiers serving overseas, and fathers teaching sons the weight of a good tool. This wasn't just commerce. It was legacy. It was permanence. The company seemed untouchable, unshakable, a fixture of American craftsmanship that would outlast them all. And then, it all fell apart. By the early 2000s, Buck Knives faced a crisis that nearly destroyed everything the family had built. The American icon that had defined quality for generations made a decision that would ignite a firestorm, one that turned their most loyal customers into enemies, shattered their reputation, and forced them into a desperate gamble just to survive. So how does a company this powerful, this beloved, this inevitable, bring itself to the edge of extinction? What happened next? The answer lies in a hidden flaw the company carried for decades, one they never saw coming until it was almost too late. Chapter 1. Hoyt Buck was born in 1889 in Kansas, the son of a blacksmith. He grew up surrounded by fire and metal, watching his father shape horseshoes and farm tools in a world where everything had to be made by hand. But Hoyt had a problem with the knives of his era. They went dull too fast. For a young apprentice blacksmith, a dull blade wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a failure of craft. So Hoyt became obsessed, not with making knives faster or cheaper, but with making them better, stronger, sharper, knives that could hold an edge. During the Great Depression, while most men struggled just to eat, Hoyt Buck spent his spare time experimenting with heat-treating techniques in a makeshift workshop. He wasn't chasing wealth, he was chasing perfection, a blade that wouldn't let you down. Then in 1942, everything changed. America went to war, and Hoyt Buck saw an opportunity, not to profit, but to serve. He began handcrafting knives for American soldiers heading overseas, each one built with the same obsessive care he'd honed over decades. Word spread fast among the troops. Buck's blades don't quit. Those knives came home with the men who carried them. And when the war ended, those men didn't forget. They told their sons, their brothers, their hunting buddies. In 1945, Hoyt and his son Al officially founded H.H. Buck & Son in San Diego, a tiny family-run operation with a reputation bigger than its square footage. They had no factory, no investors, no grand ambitions of empire. Just a father, a son, and an unshakable belief, if you make something right, people will remember. What they didn't know yet was that they were about to create the most iconic knife in American history and build an empire that would one day face a reckoning neither of them could imagine. Chapter 2. Al Buck had a problem. By the early 1960s, Buck Knives had earned a solid reputation among hunters and outdoorsmen. Their fixed-blade knives were beautiful, durable, trusted. But they were also predictable. Every knife company in America made fixed-blade hunters. Buck was respected, but they weren't different, and Al Buck didn't want to be just another knife maker. He'd been obsessing over a design challenge that had plagued the industry for decades, folding knives. The concept was simple, a blade that folded into its own handle for safe, convenient carry. But execution? That was the problem. Most folding knives on the market were cheap, flimsy, unreliable. The kind of thing you'd use to open a letter, maybe cut some string. But take it into the field? Trust it to dress a deer or survive a week in the wilderness? Absolutely not. Al saw the gap. Hunters wanted a folding knife, something they could carry in their pocket instead of strapped to their belt. But they needed it built with the same integrity as a fixed blade. No compromises, no shortcuts. So in his workshop, late into the night, Al Buck designed something that didn't exist, a folding knife engineered like a precision instrument. The key was the lockback mechanism. When you opened the blade, a spring-loaded lever would lock it into place with an audible click, as solid and secure as any fixed blade. It wouldn't wiggle, it wouldn't fold on your hand mid-cut, it was safe. And that sound, that mechanical certainty, it would become one of the most recognizable sounds in American outdoor culture. In 1964, Buck released the Model A110 Folding Hunter. It wasn't flashy, The marketing budget was almost non-existent. Al and his small team simply believed that if they built it right, the knife would speak for itself. It retailed for about $15, expensive for a folding knife at the time. Critics thought they were crazy. Why would anyone pay premium prices for a folder when cheaper options flooded the market? But the first people who held it understood. This wasn't a gimmick. This was a tool you could depend on. The blade held its edge like Hoyt's original heat-treating formulas promised. The lockback was bomb-proof. The walnut handle fit perfectly in your hand. And that belt sheath, you could carry it anywhere. Best knife I've ever owned. Thing's a tank. My dad gave me his, still sharp after 20 years. Within months, demand exploded. The Model A110 became the best-selling sporting knife in American history, not because of advertising campaigns or celebrity endorsements, but because every person who bought one told two more people, and those people told two more. By the late 1960s, Buck wasn't just making knives anymore, they were setting the standard. Other manufacturers scrambled to copy the lockback design. Cheaper imitations flooded the market, but it didn't matter, because when someone said, "I need a good folding knife," the response was always the same: get a Buck. The Buck 110 wasn't just a product. It became a cultural icon, the knife your grandfather carried, your father passed down, and you'd eventually give to your own son. It represented something larger than steel and wood: American craftsmanship, dependability, legacy. The Model 110 transformed Buck knives from a small family workshop into a manufacturing dynasty. It gave them momentum, it gave them dominance, but it also gave them something more dangerous: certainty. The belief that if you just keep doing what made you great, you'll stay great. And in business, certainty is where empires go to die. Chapter 3. Success is easy to celebrate, but sustaining it? That's where most companies fail. By 1970, Buck knives had a hit product that competitors were desperately trying to copy. The Model 110 was selling faster than they could make them. Retail stores across America were begging for inventory, and Al Buck faced a decision that would define the next 3 decades. Scale up fast and risk losing quality, or grow carefully and risk losing momentum? Al chose a third option, one that would prove genius: controlled expansion with obsessive quality control. While other knife companies were rushing production overseas or cutting corners to maximize profit, Buck made a radical commitment. Every single knife would still be made in America by American workers to the exact same standards Hoyt Buck established decades earlier. This wasn't just patriotism, it was strategy. Because Buck understood something their competitors didn't. Their reputation was their competitive advantage. Lose the quality, lose everything. Throughout the 1970s, Buck methodically expanded their San Diego operations. They invested in state-of-the-art heat-treating technology that made their blades even stronger. They developed proprietary steel formulas that competitors couldn't replicate. They hired more craftsmen and trained them for months before they were allowed to work on production knives. Every knife that left the factory had to pass through multiple inspection points. If it wasn't perfect, it didn't ship, period. And then Buck did something almost unheard of in manufacturing. They introduced an unconditional lifetime warranty, forever. If your Buck knife ever failed for any reason, even decades later, they'd repair or replace it, no questions asked. It was a promise that could have bankrupted them. But Al Buck believed in the math of quality. If you build it right the first time, you'll never have to build it again. He was right. While they obsessed over quality in the factory, Buck made equally smart moves in distribution. They understood that hardware stores and sporting goods shops were the lifeblood of their business. The trusted local retailers where hunters and outdoorsmen actually bought their gear. So instead of chasing big box retail contracts that would squeeze their margins, Buck built deep relationships with independent dealers. They offered generous terms. They ensured consistent supply. They created in-store displays that told the Buck story, the craftsmanship, the heritage, the warranty. And those store owners, they became evangelists. Because Buck didn't just sell them knives, Buck made them look good to their customers. When someone walked in asking for a quality blade, recommending Buck was easy. It made the sale. It built trust. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Buck wisely began expanding beyond the Model A110. But they didn't rush. Each new design was carefully engineered, tested, and refined. The Buck 119 Special, a fixed-blade hunting knife with a 6-inch blade, became the go-to choice for serious hunters tackling big game. Tactical and survival knives entered the lineup as Buck expanded into military and law enforcement markets. Buck knives became standard issue for certain military units. They were carried by first responders. They were in the packs of mountaineers summiting Everest. Each new market Buck entered, they didn't just participate, they dominated. And that dominance wasn't built on hype or marketing gimmicks. It was built on something rare in American business: actual, measurable, undeniable superiority. When Buck finally did invest in advertising, they didn't need to make wild claims. The message was simple, confident, earned. The finest cutting tools made in the world today, manufactured in the USA by Buck Knives. By the 1980s, the Buck name had become so synonymous with quality folding knives that people stopped saying pocket knife, they just said Buck knife. It was linguistic dominance, the kind of brand penetration money can't buy. Buck knives became heirlooms, tools passed down through generations, each one carrying stories, the deer it dressed, the ropes it cut, the campfires it sat beside. Fathers gave them to sons not just as gifts but as symbols. This is what lasts. This is what you can depend on. That emotional connection, that trust, was Buck's greatest asset. It meant customers weren't just buying a product, they were buying into a legacy, a standard, a promise that had been kept for generations, and the Buck family knew it. They'd taken Hoyt's obsession with quality and turned it into an empire that employed hundreds of American workers, generated millions in annual revenue, and had achieved something incredibly rare in business. They'd built something that actually mattered. By the mid-1990s, Buck Knives wasn't just successful, they were dominant, market leaders in multiple categories, cultural icons, an American manufacturing success story at a time when American manufacturing was supposedly dying. They had earned every bit of it, the smart moves, the patient growth, the refusal to compromise. Buck Knives had done everything right, but in business, doing everything right doesn't guarantee survival, because beneath all that success, all that dominance, all that carefully built trust, a hidden weakness was growing, one that Buck didn't see coming, one that would eventually cost them everything they'd built, and it had nothing to do with their knives. It had everything to do with where they made them. Chapter 4. There are moments in business history when a company transcends commerce and becomes something more, a standard, a benchmark, an institution. For Buck Knives, the mid-1990s was that moment. The company that started in a small San Diego shop had grown into one of the most recognized knife brands on the planet. Over 400 employees, state-of-the-art manufacturing equipment, production capacity that could output thousands of knives daily while maintaining the quality standards Hoyt Buck had established nearly a century earlier. This wasn't just a factory, it was a cathedral of American craftsmanship. A place where steel, fire, and human skill combined to create something permanent in an increasingly disposable world. The numbers told a story of relentless, disciplined growth. Annual revenues in the tens of millions. Market share that competitors could only envy. The Model of 110 alone had sold millions of units since its 1964 debut, and it was still their bestseller 3 decades later. But the real power wasn't in the spreadsheets, it was in the perception. Buck had achieved something marketing executives spend entire careers chasing: cultural inevitability. When a screenplay called for a hunter, that hunter carried a buck. When a father taught his child to whittle, he handed them a buck. When soldiers deployed overseas, many brought personal Buck knives alongside their issued gear. The brand had become woven into the fabric of American outdoor life, as essential and expected as Levi's jeans or Zippo lighters. It wasn't just market dominance, it was cultural ownership. And the industry noticed. Buck collected accolades like others collected dust. Knife of the Year awards, Hall of Fame inductions, industry leadership positions held by Buck family members who shaped standards and practices across the entire cutlery sector. Buck's reach extended far beyond American borders. Europe, Asia, Australia, anywhere people valued quality tools, the Buck name carried weight. International distributors fought for contracts. Foreign retailers featured Buck prominently because the brand sold itself. That lifetime warranty, the one critics thought would bankrupt them, had become their greatest marketing asset, because Buck rarely needed to honor it. Their knives didn't fail. The warranty existed not as insurance but as proof. Proof that Buck believed in their product so completely, they'd stake their entire reputation on every single blade that left the factory. The letters poured in constantly. Hunters writing about the Buck they dressed with their grandfather's Buck 110. Fishermen whose knives had survived decades of saltwater exposure. Veterans whose Buck blades had saved their lives in combat situations. These weren't just customers, they were believers. And in business, believers don't just buy, they recruit. Every Buck knife sold became an advertisement that lasted decades. Every satisfied customer became a salesperson who worked for free. The growth was organic, viral before viral existed, powered not by advertising budgets but by earned trust. By the late 1990s, Buck's leadership team had every reason to feel invincible. They'd navigated economic recessions. They'd fought off countless competitors and cheap knockoffs. They'd watched other American manufacturers shutter their factories and move production overseas, and they'd refused. That American manufacturing commitment wasn't just patriotic branding, it was their identity. Buck knives meant American quality, American jobs, American pride. It's what separated them from everyone else. These weren't just employees. Many were second-generation Buck workers whose parents had worked the same lines. Some had been there for 20, 30 years. They knew the rhythm of production, the feel of quality, the standard that couldn't be compromised. This was the sound of American industrial success, the sound of a company doing things the right way, the hard way, the only way Buck knew how. Standing at the peak of their industry, Buck Knives had built something extraordinary. They'd proven that American manufacturing could compete globally, that quality could triumph over cheap alternatives, that family businesses could grow into empires without losing their soul. C.J. Buck, Chuck Buck's son, had joined the company and was learning the business. The succession plan was clear. The future seemed certain. The Buck legacy would continue for generations to come. They had done everything right. But in that success, that total, complete, seemingly unshakable dominance, a dangerous complacency had taken root. Because Buck's greatest strength, their unwavering commitment to American manufacturing in their San Diego facility, was about to become their greatest liability. Beneath the success, beneath the industry dominance, beneath all those millions of satisfied customers, something was changing. The business environment that had allowed Buck to thrive for decades was quietly, steadily, fundamentally shifting. California, once a manufacturing paradise, was becoming one of the most expensive, most regulated, most challenging places in America to operate a factory, and Buck, so focused on maintaining quality and serving customers, didn't see the storm building. Meanwhile, the global knife market was transforming. Foreign manufacturers, particularly in China, were producing knives at costs Buck couldn't begin to match. The quality wasn't the same, but it didn't matter, because for many consumers, good enough at one-third the price was starting to beat the best at premium cost. Retail was consolidating. The small independent sporting goods stores that had championed Buck for decades were being crushed by Walmart, Dick's Sporting Goods, and outdoor mega chains. And those big retailers had one message: lower your prices or lose the shelf space. Buck was caught in a vice. Their California operating costs were rising. Retail pressure was intensifying. Cheap foreign competition was flooding the market. And their entire business model, premium American-made knives at premium prices, was under assault from every direction. The leadership team was beginning to realize a terrifying truth: the world had changed around them. And the very foundation that Buck Knives was built on, American manufacturing at any cost, might no longer be sustainable. The golden age was ending. And what came next would test everything the Buck family believed about their company, their values, and their legacy. Because when you've built an empire on principle, what happens when those principles become impossible to afford? Chapter 5. Every empire falls because of a decision that seemed reasonable at the time. In the winter of 1999, Buck Knives faced a crisis that had been building for years. Their San Diego facility, the heart of everything they'd built, was bleeding money. California's regulatory environment had become a minefield. Workers' compensation insurance had tripled. Environmental compliance costs were crushing. Real estate taxes were astronomical. And meanwhile, every single one of their competitors was moving production to China, Taiwan, Pakistan, countries where labor costs were a fraction of American wages and regulations were virtually non-existent. Buck's leadership team, Chuck Buck and his son C.J., stared at the numbers and confronted an impossible question. How do you compete when your costs are double or triple your competitors, and retailers are demanding lower prices every quarter? The obvious answer, the one every business consultant, every industry analyst, every Wall Street voice was shouting, was simple: move production overseas. Join the rest of American manufacturing in the great outsourcing wave. Slash costs, protect margins, survive. But Buck couldn't do it. Not completely. Their entire brand identity was built on American manufacturing. Made in USA wasn't just a label, it was a promise. Break that promise, and what was Buck? Just another knife company. So they crafted what seemed like a perfect compromise, a strategy so logical, so carefully reasoned, that it appeared almost brilliant. They would create two product lines: the flagship products, the Model 1110, the 1119 Special. The core Buck Knives that defined the brand would remain American-made. No compromises, same quality, same standards, same San Diego facility. But the new designs, lower-priced models aimed at big-box retailers and budget-conscious consumers, those would be manufactured overseas. Different steel, simpler construction, lower price points. It was a hybrid strategy. Have your cake and eat it too. Protect the premium brand while competing in the value market. Keep American jobs for the important products while outsourcing the commodity stuff. On paper it was genius. Buck could maintain their heritage, keep their skilled American workforce employed on the products that mattered, while still offering affordable options to consumers being crushed by Walmart's relentless price pressure. In 2000, Buck quietly began outsourcing production of certain knife models to China. The announcement was low-key. The messaging was careful, expanding our product line to serve all customers, maintaining our commitment to American manufacturing for our core products, and at first it seemed to work. The imported knives hit their price targets, big box retailers placed orders, Buck's overall sales volume increased. The company was adapting, evolving, surviving. But what Buck's leadership didn't fully grasp, what they couldn't grasp in the moment, was that they hadn't just changed their manufacturing strategy, they'd changed their identity. The customers noticed immediately. Just bought a Buck at Cabela's, made in China, never again. My grandfather's Buck lasted 40 years. This Chinese one broke in 6 months. They sold out. Just another American brand that doesn't mean anything anymore. The backlash started small. Disappointed forum posts, returns at retail stores, quiet grumbling among longtime Buck loyalists. But it spread like wildfire through the outdoor community, that tight-knit world where brand loyalty runs deep and betrayal is never forgotten. Buck tried to control the narrative. They emphasized that their premium knives were still American-made. They explained the business realities. They pointed to quality control measures on the imported products. But in the court of public perception, explanations don't matter. Feelings matter. And Buck's core customers, the hunters, outdoorsmen, military veterans, the people who'd built the Buck brand through decades of word-of-mouth loyalty, felt betrayed. Because Buck had built their empire on a simple, powerful idea: we make the best, and we make it here. That wasn't just marketing, it was a covenant. And now that covenant was broken. The cruel irony became apparent within months. The imported knives sold at volume but generated minimal profit. Meanwhile, the premium American-made knives where Buck's real margins lived began to suffer because the brand itself was now tainted. Customers who would have paid premium prices for a Buck knife started looking at alternatives. Benchmade, Spyderco, Kershaw, other American or quality-focused brands that hadn't compromised. Buck was stuck in the worst possible position. They damaged their premium reputation without actually solving their cost problem. Chuck Buck would later call it one of the most painful decisions of his life. Not because it was wrong from a pure business standpoint, the math made sense, but because it revealed a truth that Buck's leadership had underestimated. Trust takes generations to build and moments to destroy. And the damage wasn't just external. Inside the San Diego facility, morale cratered. American workers who'd built Buck knives with pride for decades now saw their company logo on products made by foreign workers they'd never meet. The message was clear, even if unintended: your work isn't valuable enough. Productivity suffered. Quality control issues increased. The institutional knowledge, that decades-deep understanding of what made a Buck knife, began to fade as experienced workers retired or left, wondering if their craft even mattered anymore. Buck had tried to have it both ways: premium American-made products and cheap imported alternatives, heritage and modernization, principle and profit. But business doesn't work that way. You can't be two things at once. You can't promise everything and protect nothing. The fatal shift wasn't dramatic. There was no single catastrophic failure, no scandal, no lawsuit, just a quiet erosion of the very thing that made Buck special. They'd made a logical decision, a defensible decision, a decision that probably saved the company from immediate financial collapse. But in trying to save Buck knives, they'd lost what made Buck worth saving, and the consequences, the real consequences, were just beginning. There's a moment in every crisis when the future announces itself, quietly, politely, almost apologetically. A moment when the universe whispers, "Turn back now." Most companies miss that moment, not because they're stupid or reckless, but because they're successful. And success is the most effective blindfold ever invented. In the quarters immediately following Buck's decision to manufacture certain models overseas, the numbers looked fine. Not spectacular, but fine. Revenue stabilized. The cost savings from Chinese manufacturing were real. Big box retailers were placing larger orders. Wall Street analysts covering the broader cutlery industry would have called Buck's pivot smart adaptation, and that's exactly what Buck's leadership told themselves. They'd made a tough call, weathered some initial criticism, and emerged stable. The hybrid strategy, premium American products alongside value imports, was working. But beneath those acceptable numbers, beneath the surface-level metrics that executives use to sleep at night, something fundamental was breaking. It started in the places corporate leadership rarely looks: the customer service trenches. Linda Martinez had worked Buck's customer service line for 17 years. She'd handled thousands of calls, mostly warranty inquiries, usage questions, compliments from satisfied customers. But in early 2002, she started noticing a pattern. Blade won't hold edge. Imported model. Lock mechanism failed after 3 months. China made. Customer very angry. Says this isn't a real Buck. I understand your frustration, sir. Yes, some of our models are now manufactured overseas, but they still carry the Buck warranty. I don't want a warranty on garbage. I want the Buck knife my father carried. This isn't it. The complaints weren't just about quality, though there were quality issues. Blades arriving with uneven grinds, lock mechanisms that felt loose, handle materials that didn't match Buck's historical standards. But the real problem was deeper. It was emotional. Customers felt betrayed, deceived, like they'd been sold a promise and received something else. And when Linda Martinez compiled her quarterly customer sentiment report and flagged the trend, management's response was swift and predictable. Vocal minority, the phrase every company uses when customers are screaming, and leadership wants to believe everything's fine. 300 miles north, in a small sporting goods shop in Kalispell, Montana, Jim Davidson was having a problem he'd never experienced in 25 years of selling Buck knives. They weren't selling. Jim's customers, hunters, ranchers, outdoorsmen who'd bought Buck knives religiously for decades, were asking questions. Where was this made? Is this the same quality? Why does it feel different? And when they saw that Made in China stamp, many just walked away. Store owners started calling their Buck sales representatives, politely at first, then more insistently. The imported models weren't moving. Could they get more American-made inventory? Could Buck clarify the messaging? Were there plans to reverse course? The reports reached Buck's executive team, and the response was, again, measured, rational, data-driven. Because here's what the data showed. While some small independent retailers were struggling with the imported products, the big retailers, Walmart, Dick's Sporting Goods, Cabela's, were moving volume. Total units sold were actually up. Revenue was holding. What the data didn't show was that Buck was shifting from high-margin premium sales to low-margin volume sales. They were selling more knives but making less profit per knife. They were winning at retail velocity while losing at brand value. Inside the factory, the warning signs were even clearer. If anyone had been paying attention, Robert Chen had started at Buck in 1971. Fresh out of high school, he'd learned blade grinding from masters who'd learned from Hoyt Buck's generation. He could feel a blade's edge with his thumb and know instantly if the heat treatment was right, if the grind was true, if it would hold up in the field. But by 2003, Robert was training fewer and fewer apprentices, because Buck wasn't hiring many new machinists anymore. Why invest in expensive, time-intensive training when more products were being made overseas? The workers noticed. The union representatives noticed. They raised concerns in quarterly labor meetings. Are we being phased out? Is the San Diego facility going to close? What's the long-term plan? And management meant it. They genuinely had no plans to close San Diego. They believed in the hybrid model, but what they didn't understand was that you can't maintain world-class manufacturing capability by slowly starving it. Skills that took generations to develop don't go dormant, they disappear. And once they're gone, you can't just hire them back. Meanwhile, the competitive landscape was evolving faster than Buck realized. Companies like Benchmade and Spyderco weren't just making knives, they were creating communities, knife enthusiast forums, collector cultures, limited editions. They were treating knives not as tools but as objects of desire. Buck, focused on managing their manufacturing crisis and maintaining retail relationships, was missing the cultural shift. The knife world was becoming younger, more design-focused, more urban, and Buck's brand identity traditional, heritage. Your grandfather's knife was starting to feel old. The marketing department flagged it. Product development saw it. But it got lost in the noise of more immediate concerns. Because Buck's leadership was fighting yesterday's war, manufacturing costs and retail margins, while tomorrow's war, brand relevance and cultural positioning, was already being lost. By 2004, some inside Buck's leadership were finally starting to connect the dots. CJ Buck could see it. The numbers that mattered, not quarterly revenue but long-term brand health, were deteriorating. Customer loyalty was eroding. The emotional connection that had driven Buck's success was fraying. And the California operating environment was getting worse, not better. He made the argument in board meetings. We need to make a dramatic change. Either fully commit to American manufacturing and move to a business-friendly state, or fully embrace overseas production and compete on price. This hybrid approach is killing us slowly. But dramatic change is hard when you're a family company carrying 4 generations of legacy. When your father built the company on certain principles. When hundreds of employees depend on decisions you make. When every choice feels like you're either betraying your heritage or bankrupting your future. So they compromised. Again, they'd monitor the situation. Optimize where possible. Maybe close a few unprofitable product lines. Improve quality control on the imported products. Launch a marketing campaign emphasizing their American-made core models. Incremental adjustments. Measured responses. The kind of reasonable, responsible management that business schools teach and consultants recommend. And all the while the warning signs kept mounting. Each signal in isolation could be explained away. Market fluctuations. Regional anomalies. Temporary setbacks.
natural business cycles, but collectively, they were screaming a message that Buck's leadership didn't want to hear. The brand is dying. The foundation is crumbling. You're running out of time. The tragic irony was that Buck was still making great knives. Their American-made products were as good as they'd ever been. The craftsmanship hadn't declined. The quality hadn't dropped. But in business, being great isn't enough. You have to be great and trusted, great and relevant, great and financially sustainable. And Buck, caught between their principles and their survival, between their heritage and their future, between what they were and what they needed to become, was losing on all fronts. Time was running out. The warnings were no longer subtle. The cracks were becoming chasms. And Buck Knives, the American icon, the family dynasty, the brand that had defined quality for generations, was approaching a moment of reckoning. Because there's only so long you can ignore reality before reality stops asking permission. And for Buck Knives, reality was about to demand answers they didn't have. The warning signs had been ignored. The fatal shift had been made. The foundation had been weakened. Now came the crisis.
Chapter 7. Sometimes a crisis arrives wearing a mask you never expected. In the weeks following September 11th, America transformed overnight. Airports became fortresses. Security screening intensified. And suddenly, innocuous items, nail clippers, pocket tools, knives, became contraband. For Buck Knives, the impact was immediate and devastating. Post-9/11 security restrictions essentially eliminated knife sales in airports and drastically reduced everyday carry culture. Travelers who'd routinely carried a Buck folder in their pocket for decades couldn't anymore. The casual knife market, a significant revenue stream, evaporated. But that was just the beginning. Because 9/11 didn't just change security, it changed the economy. The early 2000s recession hit hard. Sporting goods retailers, already consolidating, started demanding even steeper discounts. Consumers tightened budgets. Premium products like Buck's American-made knives became luxuries people could skip. Buck's hybrid strategy, already under strain, was now being stress-tested by forces completely beyond their control. And the cracks that had been forming quietly for years were about to break wide open. By late 2003, Buck's California facility was hemorrhaging cash. The math was brutal and getting worse. Operating costs in San Diego were among the highest in the nation. California had just passed new environmental regulations that required expensive factory upgrades. Energy costs were spiking. Workers' compensation insurance premiums had become astronomical. And then Chuck and CJ Buck made a decision that would trigger the most devastating crisis in the company's history. They decided to move everything overseas. Not the hybrid model, not the careful balance, everything. The entire American manufacturing operation would be shut down. Production would move to China. The San Diego facility, the heart of Buck Knives, the place where 4 generations had crafted millions of knives, would close. They planned to announce it carefully, strategically, with messaging emphasizing survival, competitiveness, inevitable market forces. They'd offer severance packages, they'd promise quality control measures, they'd explain that this was about saving Buck Knives, not abandoning its principles. But in January 2004, before Buck could manage the message, it leaked. The reaction was immediate and furious. News coverage, angry workers being interviewed outside the factory, union representatives condemning the decision, community leaders expressing betrayal. Worker number 1, I gave this company 30 years, my father worked here, and they're just throwing us away? Worker 2, they kept saying Made in USA was who they were. Guess that was a lie. Social media posts appearing on screen, circa 2004, forums, early Facebook, email chains, Buck Knives is dead to me, selling out American workers for Chinese profit, disgusting. My grandfather carried a Buck at D-Day, I'm throwing mine in the trash. But the worker anger, the community backlash, that was expected, painful, but expected. What Buck's leadership didn't anticipate was the customer revolt. The outdoor community, Buck's most loyal constituency, the hunters and fishermen and outdoorsmen who'd made Buck an American icon, erupted. These weren't casual consumers, these were believers. People who'd carried Buck Knives for decades, who'd bought them for their sons, who'd defended the brand in countless campfire debates about which knife was best. And now they felt betrayed. Organized boycotts formed within days. Never buy Buck again. Facebook groups sprouted. Outdoor retailers reported customers returning Buck Knives, demanding refunds on products they'd owned for years, just to make a statement. The sales collapse was catastrophic. Retailers who'd supported Buck for decades started pulling products from shelves, not because the knives were bad, but because customers refused to buy them. Some stores reported zero Buck sales for entire weeks, and then the media feeding frenzy began. News clips appearing in sequence: CNN Business, another American manufacturing icon falls to outsourcing. Fox News, Buck Knives abandons American workers. Local San Diego News, 400 jobs lost as Buck Knives closes historic factory. Reporter, Mr. Buck, what do you say to workers who feel betrayed? Reporter, is Buck Knives still an American company? Reporter, will the quality remain the same? Every answer he gave made it worse. Explanations sounded like excuses. Business rationale sounded like corporate greed. Promises about quality control sounded hollow when you're shutting down the very factory that defined your quality. Buck's customer service department was overwhelmed. Hundreds of calls daily. Angry emails flooding in by the thousands. The forever warranty, once Buck's greatest marketing asset, became a weapon turned against them. And the worst part, many of the people calling weren't even asking for refunds or repairs. They were calling just to tell Buck how disappointed they were, to say goodbye to a brand they'd loved, to mourn the death of something that had mattered to them. My father gave me his Buck knife before he died in 1967. I carried it every day for 37 years. I was going to give it to my grandson. But what's the point now? It doesn't mean what it used to mean. You broke something that couldn't be fixed. That was the real crisis. Not the financial numbers. Not the media coverage. Not even the worker layoffs, as painful as those were. The crisis was that Buck had broken trust with the people who'd built their empire through generations of word-of-mouth loyalty. And trust, once broken, doesn't heal with press releases. In 2005, Buck Knives officially closed their San Diego facility and moved operations to Post Falls, Idaho. But the crisis had already forced a dramatic reversal of their outsourcing plans, because the boycott was working. Sales had collapsed so completely, so catastrophically, that Buck's entire business model was in jeopardy. The company was weeks away from missing payroll. Credit lines were being questioned. Bankruptcy was becoming a real possibility. C.J. Buck fought desperately to salvage the situation. He convinced his father and the board that full outsourcing was a fatal mistake. The customer reaction had proven that. Buck's identity was American manufacturing. Remove that and Buck was just another commodity knife brand, competing on price against manufacturers who could always go cheaper. So Buck pivoted again, this time abandoning the Chinese outsourcing plan, and committing to rebuild American production in Idaho, where business costs were a fraction of California's. It was a desperate gamble. Moving the entire operation was expensive. Retraining workers in a new location was risky, and there was no guarantee customers would forgive them. But the damage was done. The crisis had exposed Buck's vulnerabilities to everyone: competitors, retailers, customers, employees. The aura of invincibility was shattered. The brand that had seemed permanent, unshakable, forever, was revealed to be fragile after all, and Buck's competitors were watching. They saw the crisis, they saw the customer anger, they saw the market share hemorrhaging, and they pounced. Benchmade launched campaigns explicitly contrasting their American manufacturing commitment with Buck's waffling. Spyderco offered trade-in programs. Bring us your old Buck. Get a discount on a Spyderco. Kershaw positioned themselves as the value alternative for customers who'd lost faith in premium pricing. In 18 months, Buck lost market share they'd held for decades. Premium folder sales, their profit center, declined by over 40%. Retail shelf space shrank. Their position as America's knife brand was under siege from every direction. For Chuck Buck, the crisis was personal in ways that transcended business. This wasn't just a company, it was his father's legacy, his grandfather's dream, 4 generations of Buck family craftsmanship, and on his watch, it had nearly died. How do you explain to your father's memory that you almost destroyed what he built, that you made decisions, logical decisions, defensible decisions, that brought an empire to its knees? The crisis had revealed a brutal truth that every family business eventually confronts. Legacy is both your greatest asset and your greatest burden. It gives you identity, purpose, customer loyalty, but it also chains you to expectations that the market may no longer support. By the end of 2005, Buck had survived, barely. The Idaho facility was operational. American manufacturing had been preserved. The worst-case scenario had been avoided. But survival isn't victory. Buck had lost customers they'd never get back. They'd lost trust that would take years, maybe decades, to rebuild. They'd lost market position to competitors who'd filled the vacuum. The knives were still good, the craftsmanship was still there, but the magic, that intangible quality that makes a brand more than just a product, had been damaged in ways that spreadsheets couldn't measure. Bought my first Buck in 15 years, giving them another chance. Quality seems good, but it's not the same feeling. Idaho made is better than China, but I switched to Benchmade. Buck lost my trust. My dad's Buck lasted 40 years. Will this one? Guess we'll see. The crisis had passed. The acute emergency was over. Buck knives would live to fight another day. But what they were fighting for, whether they could reclaim what they'd lost, whether the Buck name still meant what it used to mean, whether American manufacturing could truly compete in the 21st century, those questions remained unanswered. The crisis had tested Buck knives to its breaking point. Now came the hardest part: recovery. Chapter 8. There's a particular kind of panic that sets in when a company realizes it's dying and doesn't know how to stop it. Buck's leadership team had successfully relocated to Idaho. They'd preserved American manufacturing. They'd avoided bankruptcy. By every conventional business metric, they'd executed a brilliant strategic pivot. But there was one problem they couldn't solve with logistics and spreadsheets. Nobody trusted them anymore. Despite the Idaho move, despite the recommitment to American manufacturing, sales remained catastrophically below pre-crisis levels. Retail reorders were anemic. Customer surveys showed deep skepticism. The Buck brand, once synonymous with quality and trust, now carried baggage, doubt, disappointment, betrayal. Brand trust score, down 63%. Purchase intent, down 47%. Would recommend, down 58%. CJ Buck understood they needed to rebuild trust. The question was how, and that's where Buck made its second catastrophic mistake. They hired a prestigious marketing firm out of Seattle, the kind of agency that specialized in brand turnarounds and reputation management. And that agency came back with exactly the kind of strategy that sounds brilliant in a conference room and dies in the real world. The campaign launched in early 2006. Full-page ads in outdoor magazines, television spots during hunting shows, radio campaigns on country stations, and the message was clear: confident and completely tone-deaf. For over a century, Buck knives has been the American standard. Through world wars and changing times, through challenges and triumphs, Buck has never wavered. Made in America, built to last, forever. The problem was immediately obvious to everyone except Buck's leadership. Never wavered. Customers who'd watched Buck flip-flop between California, China, and Idaho within 18 months found that claim laughable. American forever? Tell that to the workers laid off in San Diego. Built to last. The trust you destroyed lasted barely a year. Are they serious with this ad? They just tried to move everything to China. Never wavered. Is this a joke? They wavered all over the place. Buck thinks we're stupid. This is insulting. Madison Avenue BS trying to cover up corporate betrayal. The campaign wasn't just ineffective, it was actively harmful, because it revealed that Buck's leadership fundamentally misunderstood the problem. Customers weren't upset about where Buck made knives. They were upset about being lied to. For decades, Buck hadn't needed to advertise their American manufacturing. It was simply who they were. Authentic, unquestioned, proven through action. But now, screaming American made in all caps felt desperate. Like a cheating spouse insisting I would never betray you while everyone remembers exactly when they did. When the advertising campaign failed to move sales, Buck doubled down on PR. They arranged interviews for CJ Buck with industry publications, outdoor media, business journals. The strategy was to tell Buck's story, to explain the difficult decisions, the business realities, the ultimate commitment to American workers. And CJ believed what he was saying. He genuinely thought that if customers just understood the context, the California cost pressures, the post-9/11 economic crisis, the competitive realities, they'd appreciate Buck's decisions. That transparency would rebuild trust. But explaining yourself when customers feel betrayed is like explaining a joke. If you have to do it, it's already failed. According to CJ Buck, we made the tough decisions necessary to keep Buck alive. We could have stayed in California and gone bankrupt, but that would have served no one. Technically true, logically sound, and emotionally disastrous. Tough decisions, tough for who? Not for CJ Buck, safe in his executive office. He's basically saying, we had no choice. There's always a choice. They chose profit. Notice he never actually apologizes, just justifies. And that was the shift Buck's leadership failed to recognize. The anger was fading, which should have been good news. But it wasn't being replaced with forgiveness. It was being replaced with apathy. Customers were finding other brands. Benchmade, Spyderco, Kershaw, CRKT. The knife market in 2006 had more quality options than ever before, and once someone switched brands and discovered their new knife worked just fine, they stopped caring about Buck's explanations. Meanwhile, Buck made another catastrophic misstep, this time in how they handled their intellectual property. Counterfeit Buck knives had always been a problem. But during the crisis, as Buck's brand weakened, the counterfeit market exploded. Cheap knockoffs flooded discount retailers, flea markets, online marketplaces, and many consumers, no longer trusting the Buck name anyway, couldn't tell or didn't care about the difference. Buck's legal team responded aggressively. Cease and desist letters, trademark lawsuits, customs seizures. They went after manufacturers, distributors, even small retailers selling knockoffs. And again, technically they were right. These were trademark violations, illegal counterfeits. Buck was protecting their intellectual property exactly as corporate lawyers recommend. But optics matter, and the optics of a struggling American company using lawyers to go after small American retailers, many of whom didn't even know the knives were counterfeit, were terrible. Family-owned outdoor shop facing lawsuit from knife manufacturer. Buck Knives going after the little guy now. Classy. They've got money for lawyers but couldn't keep American workers employed? Maybe if their brand meant something, people wouldn't buy knockoffs. Buck was trapped in a perception death spiral. Every defensive move was seen as aggressive. Every explanation was heard as an excuse. Every attempt to rebuild the brand was dismissed as manipulation. And then, facing continued financial pressure, Buck did what struggling companies always do. They started cutting costs. Again, individually, each decision was defensible. The company was hemorrhaging cash. Margins were compressed. They had to reduce expenses. But collectively, these cuts started to affect the very thing Buck claimed made them special: quality. It was gradual, barely noticeable at first. Inspection protocols shortened by 30 seconds per knife. Training periods for new workers reduced from 8 weeks to 5. Quality control sampling rates decreased from 20%. Individually, none of these changes should have mattered. Collectively, they started showing up where it counted most. By late 2007, Buck's customer service department was seeing something they'd never experienced before: systematic quality issues with Idaho-made knives, lock mechanism failing prematurely, blade edge chipping under normal use, handle scales coming loose, uneven grinds making it past inspection. And here's where Buck's response went from merely ineffective to actively self-destructive. Customer expectations may be unrealistic, given price point and market conditions. Emphasize warranty coverage in service responses. Do not acknowledge systemic issues. Deny, deflect, defend. Customer service representatives, following management guidance, started responding to quality complaints with corporate speak that infuriated customers further. Buck knives are manufactured to rigorous standards. Your experience is not typical of our products. We'll honor the warranty, but we don't see evidence of manufacturing defect. Every denied complaint became an online review. Every defensive response became a forum post. And Buck's reputation, already damaged, took hit after hit from their own customers documenting quality problems that Buck refused to acknowledge. Blade broke on first use. Customer service was dismissive. This isn't the Buck I remember. Quality control is gone. Don't waste your money. My 1970s Buck's still perfect. This 2007 model is garbage. What happened? Retailers started voicing concerns directly. Store managers who'd championed Buck for decades were now hesitant to reorder. The warranty returns were eating into their margins. Customers were complaining in stores, damaging the retailer's reputation, and Buck's response to retailer concerns was to offer discounts, deeper wholesale pricing, better payment terms, volume incentives. It was textbook business school crisis management. When demand weakens, reduce price to stimulate volume. Except Buck was now training their retail partners, and by extension customers, that Buck knives were discount products. The brand that had commanded premium prices for a century was now competing on price. The company that built an empire on "you get what you pay for" was now saying "we're cheaper than you think." And once a premium brand goes discount, the road back to premium is almost impossible to travel. By the end of 2008, just 3 years after the Idaho relocation that was supposed to save the company, Buck was in worse shape than ever. They'd spent millions on marketing that backfired, PR that fell flat, legal battles that made them look petty, cost-cutting that damaged quality, discounting that destroyed brand value. Every response had been logical, every decision defensible, every action recommended by experts, and every single one had made things worse, because Buck's leadership had fundamentally misdiagnosed the problem. They thought they were facing a business crisis: manufacturing costs, competitive pressures, operational challenges, problems that could be solved with strategy, marketing, and financial engineering. But what they were actually facing was a trust crisis. And trust can't be bought with advertising, can't be rebuilt with press releases, can't be defended with lawyers, can't be discounted into existence. Trust is earned, slowly, painfully, through consistent action over time. And Buck had spent a century earning it and 3 years destroying it. By 2009, Buck Knives, the American icon, the family dynasty, the brand that had defined quality for generations, was a cautionary tale, a warning of what happens when a company loses sight of what made it matter in the first place, when it prioritizes survival over integrity, when it tries to fix broken trust with marketing instead of merit. Buck had survived the crisis, survived the relocation, survived the market collapse, but surviving isn't the same as thriving. And the question now, the question that would determine whether Buck Knives had any future at all, wasn't whether they could survive. It was whether anyone still cared if they did.
Chapter 9. It took Buck Knives 102 years to build their empire. It took less than 5 to watch it crumble. There's a physics to failure in business. The same momentum that carries you to the top can drag you to the bottom, only faster. Because gravity works better than ambition. In 2004, Buck held approximately 18% of the American folding knife market, the largest share of any manufacturer. Their nearest competitor, Kershaw, sat at 11%. Buck was the undisputed market leader. 2005, 1.7%. 2006, 19%. The decline was relentless, accelerating, unstoppable. Every quarter brought worse news. Every projection revised downward. Every strategic plan obsolete before implementation. The financial bleeding was catastrophic. Revenue collapsed from $65 million in 2004 to $38 million by 2009. But revenue decline tells only part of the story. Profit margins were being crushed even faster. Buck's desperation pricing strategy meant they were selling more knives at lower prices with thinner margins. They were working harder, moving more product, and making less money. It's the death spiral of commodity businesses: volume without value, motion without profit. And the retail environment was shifting in ways that amplified Buck's decline. The independent sporting goods stores that had championed Buck for decades were dying, crushed by Walmart, Amazon, and outdoor megachains. These retailers weren't just Buck's distribution network. They were their advocates, the store owners who hand-sold Buck knives, who told stories about quality and heritage, who made customers feel the brand's value. When these retailers disappeared, Buck lost their most effective sales force. In the big box world, Buck was just another SKU competing on price. And competing on price was a war Buck couldn't win. Meanwhile, Buck's competitors weren't just surviving. They were thriving on Buck's corpse. Benchmade released their groundbreaking axis lock mechanism and positioned themselves as the new American quality standard. Their message was subtle but devastating. We're what Buck used to be. Spyderco exploded with innovative designs that made traditional folders look dated. They cultivated a collector culture, limited editions, collaborations with celebrity knife makers. They turned knives into culture, not just tools. Kershaw undercut everyone on price while maintaining acceptable quality. The value proposition Buck was trying and failing to execute. And CRKT emerged as the tactical knife leader, capturing military and law enforcement markets Buck had dominated for decades. By 2008, Buck wasn't just losing market share, they were becoming irrelevant. Trade show floor space shrank. Industry awards went to competitors. Knife enthusiast publications stopped reviewing Buck products because their readers weren't interested. The brand that had once defined the industry was now an afterthought. A legacy player coasting on fading recognition while innovation happened elsewhere. And inside Buck's walls, the decline was taking its human toll. Layoffs began in late 2007. First the temporary ones. Workers sent home for weeks at a time as orders declined. Then the permanent ones. Then 50. Each round of layoffs was presented as right-sizing or operational optimization. Management spoke about unfortunate but necessary decisions and positioning for future growth. But workers weren't stupid. They could see the orders drying up. They could feel the company dying. These weren't just jobs being eliminated. These were craftsmen, people who dedicated decades to perfecting their skills, who took pride in every blade they produced, who believed in what Buck represented, and now they were being discarded because the company had lost its way. Morale among remaining workers cratered. Why invest in quality when you might be laid off next month? Why care about craftsmanship when the company clearly cared more about cost than excellence? The pride that had defined Buck's workforce, the intangible asset that made Buck special, evaporated. Production quality suffered further. Experienced workers were gone. Training budgets were slashed. Pressure to hit efficiency targets overrode quality concerns, and the quality problems that started as a trickle became a flood. Warranty claims exploded. Knives arriving with defects, lock mechanisms failing, blades chipping, handle materials delaminating. Problems that would have been unthinkable in Buck's golden age were now routine. 2004 warranty claims, 2847. 2008 warranty claims, 14,392. And Buck's famous forever warranty, once their greatest marketing asset, became a massive financial liability. They were spending millions honoring warranties on knives that shouldn't have failed in the first place. The math was brutal. Every warranty claim cost Buck the replacement knife plus shipping, plus administrative overhead, plus the destroyed customer relationship. They were literally paying for their own quality decline. By late 2008, as the global financial crisis hammered an already struggling economy, Buck's leadership faced a terrifying reality. The company was running out of options. They'd cut costs to the bone, laid off workers, reduced R&D, slashed marketing, sold off non-core assets. Every traditional lever of corporate survival had been pulled. And still, the bleeding continued. The consultants delivered their diagnosis with clinical precision. Buck was suffering from terminal brand erosion coupled with structural cost disadvantage. Translation: customers don't trust you anymore, and you can't compete on price. Recommend evaluation of strategic alternatives, including partial asset sale, full acquisition, or Chapter 11 restructuring. Bankruptcy was on the table. For Chuck Buck, the prospect was unbearable. His father's company, his grandfather's legacy, 4 generations of family pride. The thought of Buck Knives filing for bankruptcy protection, being picked apart by creditors, or sold off to some private equity firm that would strip the name and outsource everything, it would mean the Buck family had failed. That everything Hoyt Buck built, the quality, the integrity, the promise of American craftsmanship, had died on their watch. While Buck was contemplating bankruptcy, Benchmade posted record revenue growth of 23%. Spyderco expanded internationally. Kershaw opened a new R&D facility. The knife industry was booming, just without Buck. Buck had gone from market leader to market irrelevance in the span of a single business cycle. Companies that didn't exist when Buck was dominant were now crushing them. Brands that Buck had never considered serious competitors now owned categories Buck invented, and Buck couldn't compete. Because competing requires investment in R&D, in materials, in talent, in marketing. And Buck was in pure survival mode, cannibalizing tomorrow to survive today. They'd become exactly what they'd feared, obsolete. Not because their knives were bad, they still made decent products, but because decent doesn't inspire, decent doesn't command premium pricing, decent doesn't build brand loyalty. Retailers were voting with shelf space. Buck's displays were reduced, relocated to less prominent positions, or eliminated entirely. The premium end cap positions Buck had owned for decades now belonged to Benchmade and Spyderco, and when retailers were asked why, the answer was brutally simple. Buck doesn't sell anymore. Customers ask for Benchmade. They ask for Spyderco. They ask for Kershaw. Nobody asks for Buck. The death spiral was complete. Declining sales led to reduced retail presence, which led to lower brand visibility, which led to worse sales. Each turn of the spiral accelerated the descent. By the end of 2009, Buck Knives employed fewer than 200 people, down from over 400 in 2004. Revenue had been cut nearly in half. Market share was in single digits. Brand value was decimated. The company that had survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and a century of business cycles was facing extinction. CJ Buck had spent 5 years fighting the market, fighting competitors, fighting reality itself. Every strategy had failed. Every initiative had backfired. Every attempt to recapture Buck's former glory had fallen short. And now he faced a choice: accept defeat, sell the company, file for bankruptcy, or simply close the doors. Walk away from 100 years of family history and admit that the Buck name no longer meant what it used to mean. Or find some way, anyway, to stop the freefall, what it once meant. The empire that took a century to build had collapsed in less than 5 years. The brand that defined American quality was now a cautionary tale. The company that seemed permanent had proven tragically temporary. Buck Knives had fallen. The question was whether they would ever get back up, or whether this was the end.
Chapter 10. There's a moment in every dying company when someone says, "What if we just went back to what made us great?" In early 2010, CJ Buck called together everyone who remained: the executives, the veteran machinists, the longest tenured workers, people who remembered what Buck used to mean. And he asked them a simple question: can we fix this? Not with marketing, not with cost cutting, not with strategic pivots or consultant recommendations, but with the only thing that ever really mattered: making knives people could trust again. The plan that emerged was radical in its simplicity. Strip away everything Buck had become in the crisis years: the discounting, the cost optimization, the corner cutting, and return to Hoyt Buck's original obsession: build the best knife possible, regardless of cost. They would slow production and reinstate rigorous quality control. Every knife would pass through multiple inspection points, no exceptions. Training programs would be restored to their original length and depth. Experienced craftsmen would mentor every new worker personally. They would eliminate the problematic imported product lines entirely. No more hybrid strategy, no more value offerings. Buck would make one thing: premium American knives. If customers wanted cheap, they could buy elsewhere. And most importantly, they would stop telling people Buck was committed to quality and start showing them. By spring 2010, the transformation was underway. Production slowed by nearly 40%, but defect rates dropped by 70%. Knives took longer to make, but they were right when they shipped. Robert Chen, the veteran machinist who'd stayed through the darkest years, described it as remembering who we were. The factory floor felt different. The pride was returning. Workers weren't just collecting paychecks. They were building something that mattered again. C.J. Buck took the first knives from the new production line and did something unprecedented. He sent them to Buck's harshest critics. No marketing spin, no press releases, just a handwritten note. "We lost our way. We're trying to find it again. This knife represents our commitment. Judge for yourself." And the response was cautiously positive. "Got the new Buck 11. Honestly, it's good. Like really good. Best Buck I've handled in years." Skeptical, but impressed. The quality is back. Whether it's too late, time will tell. This is the Buck I remember. Took them long enough. Industry publications noticed. Outdoor Life ran a feature. "Is Buck back?" Field & Stream did a comparison test. New Buck versus Benchmade and Spyderco. For the first time in years, Buck wasn't embarrassed by the results. Sales began to stabilize. Not growing, but the free fall slowed. Some retailers reported increased reorders. Customer service calls shifted from complaints to compliments. The warranty claim rate dropped to its lowest level since 2004. For the first time in 6 years, Buck's leadership team allowed themselves to believe, maybe we can survive this, maybe we can rebuild. C.J. Buck stood before his retail partners and delivered what felt like a confession. He acknowledged the mistakes, admitted the quality had suffered, took responsibility for the brand damage, and then showed them the new knives, the tangible evidence of Buck's recommitment. Orders came in, not huge, but meaningful. Retailers willing to give Buck another chance, to dedicate shelf space to the comeback story, and for a moment, a brief, fragile moment, it seemed like the story might have a redemptive ending, that Buck Knives had learned from catastrophic failure, returned to its roots and earned a second chance. But business doesn't work like movies, because while Buck was rebuilding quality, the market had moved on. Benchmade wasn't standing still. They'd released the 940 Osborne, a design so acclaimed it became an instant classic, winning every industry award. Spyderco had launched the Paramilitary 2, which became the best-selling tactical folder in America. Kershaw partnered with legendary knife maker Ken Onion, creating budget knives with premium design cachet. Buck's quality was back, but good wasn't enough anymore. The market expected great, expected innovation, expected designs that reflected modern aesthetics, modern materials, modern manufacturing techniques, and Buck didn't have the resources to compete on innovation. Years of financial bleeding had eliminated their R&D budget. Their design team was skeletal. They couldn't afford the advanced materials competitors were using. They couldn't invest in the marketing needed to rebuild brand awareness. They'd fixed the quality problem, but the relevance problem remained. And relevance can't be manufactured in a machine shop. A new generation of knife enthusiasts was emerging. Younger, more urban, more design conscious. They discussed knives on Reddit, YouTube, Instagram. They valued aesthetics as much as function. To these customers, Buck wasn't a fallen giant they wanted to see restored. Buck was just old, a brand their fathers might have cared about. Not irrelevant because Buck was bad, irrelevant because Buck wasn't interesting. Buck was winning back their existing customers, the loyal believers who wanted Buck to succeed, but they weren't attracting new customers. And a brand that can't recruit the next generation is a brand that's dying, just slowly. By 2012, Buck's quality turnaround was widely acknowledged within the industry. But when C.J. Buck met with major retail buyers trying to expand shelf space, the response was consistent. Quality has improved significantly, but customer demand hasn't. Buck doesn't drive traffic, doesn't generate excitement. We need brands people are actively searching for. You can't make people care. And increasingly, people didn't care about Buck. The trust Buck had destroyed couldn't be rebuilt with quality alone. Because trust isn't just about whether your product works, it's about whether people believe you deserve their loyalty. And for many customers, Buck had burned that bridge permanently. They make good knives now, but I can't forget how they treated their workers. Quality is back, but so what? Benchmade never lost theirs. I'll stick with brands I can trust. Buck lost that forever. Sales plateaued in 2012. The initial bump from the quality improvements leveled off. Buck had stabilized, but stabilization isn't growth. Stabilization is stagnation, and in business, if you're not growing, you're dying. Just slowly. By 2013, the painful truth was undeniable. Buck had successfully returned to quality. They'd restored operational excellence. They'd rebuilt the craftsmanship their brand was founded on. But it wasn't enough. They'd saved the company, but they couldn't save the empire. The dominance was gone. The cultural relevance was gone. The position as America's knife brand was gone. Buck Knives would survive as a viable business making quality products for a loyal but shrinking customer base. They'd avoided bankruptcy, preserved some jobs, maintained the family legacy in a reduced form, but they would never be what they were, never reclaim the dominance, never again be the undisputed standard of American cutlery excellence. The last attempt to save Buck Knives had succeeded, but only at survival. The empire was lost. The golden age was over. The Buck story had transformed from triumph to tragedy. They'd learned the hardest lesson in business: some damage can't be undone, some trust once broken can't be fully restored, some moments once lost never return. Buck had tried to go back to what made them great, and they'd succeeded. Technically, the knives were great again, but greatness isn't just about what you make, it's about what people believe you represent, and that belief, once lost, is almost impossible to reclaim. The last attempt to save Buck knives had given them a future, just not the future they'd imagined. The end of the empire. Empires don't always die with dramatic collapse, sometimes they simply fade. Buck knives still exist today. The factory still operates. Workers still craft knives with care and precision. The Buck family still owns the company. By the metrics of pure survival, Buck succeeded. They employ around 300 people, generate approximately $50 million in annual revenue, produce quality knives that earn respectable reviews. They've achieved what they fought for: stability. But stability is an empire. In 1995, Buck controlled nearly 1/5 of the American knife market. Today they hold less than 4%. Benchmade, a company that barely existed during Buck's golden age, now generates more revenue, commands higher prices, and owns the cultural space Buck once dominated. The Model 110, Buck's iconic masterpiece, the knife that changed American cutlery forever, is still in production after 62 years. You can still buy one. It's still well made, but nobody talks about it. Nobody films unboxing videos. Nobody posts it proudly in their EDC collection. It's a knife your grandfather carried, respected for history, not desired for presence. Buck became what they most feared: irrelevant. Not dead, but no longer important. A legacy brand coasting on fading recognition while innovation, culture, and market leadership happen elsewhere. Walk into a Bass Pro Shop or Cabela's today, and you'll find Buck knives, usually on the bottom shelf, often on clearance, sharing space with budget brands most knife enthusiasts have never heard of. The premium end cap displays, those belong to Benchmade. The staff picks recommendations, Spyderco and Kershaw. The knives behind the counter that require asking an employee, custom brands that cost $300 or more. Buck isn't part of the conversation anymore. And when you're not part of the conversation, you're not part of the future. CJ Buck will tell you the company is in good shape, financially stable, quality focused, building for the next generation. And he's not wrong. The business fundamentals are sound. But sometimes, late at night when he's alone with the quarterly reports and market analyses, does he think about what they lost? Does he imagine what Buck could have been if they'd made different choices in 2000? If they'd weathered the California costs differently? If they'd never compromised their identity? We'll never know. The San Diego factory where Hoyt and Al Buck built an American icon is long gone. Not demolished, just changed. Converted to office space and light manufacturing for companies that have no idea what happened there. No historical marker, no memorial, just another industrial building in a city that's moved on. The 400 workers laid off in 2005. Some found new jobs, some retired early, some never recovered financially. Their names aren't in the business school case studies about Buck knives. Their stories aren't told in the industry retrospectives. They were just numbers on a spreadsheet, costs to be optimized, right-sizing initiatives, and operational efficiencies. But they were people, craftsmen who dedicated decades to perfection, families who'd built their lives around Buck's promise of stability, trust that was broken not by malice, but by mathematics. Ironically, old Buck knives are now more valuable than new ones. Collectors prize pre-crisis Buck 110s, paying premium prices for knives made in San Diego before 2005. Those knives are artifacts, evidence of what American manufacturing used to mean. The message is clear: what Buck was matters more than what Buck is. The empire that took a century to build and dominated for generations exists now only in memory. The Buck name survives, but the Buck empire is over. Not destroyed, not bankrupted, not dramatically killed, just diminished. Somewhere in Post Falls, Idaho, a craftsman is making a Buck knife, carefully, precisely, with pride, and almost nobody notices. Legacy and lesson, the cautionary tale. The story of Buck knives isn't a story about bad people making bad knives. It's a story about good people making logical decisions that destroyed something irreplaceable. Every decision Buck's leadership made seemed reasonable at the time. Outsource to China to cut costs? Every competitor was doing it. Move from California to reduce expenses? Basic business logic. Cut quality control to preserve margins during crisis? Necessary for survival. But what looks like logic in a spreadsheet can be poison to a brand. Because Buck's leadership forgot the most fundamental truth of business: you're not selling products, you're selling trust. And trust, real trust, the kind that takes generations to build, is more valuable than any profit margin, any cost saving, any quarterly result. Buck spent 100 years building trust. They told customers, our knives are the best, and we make them in America with uncompromising quality. And customers believed them. Believed so deeply they passed Buck knives to their children, built their identities around the brand.
defended Buck in campfire debates for decades. That trust was Buck's real asset, not their factories, not their patents, not their distribution network. The emotional connection between the brand and the customer, the belief that Buck would never let you down. And Buck traded that trust worth billions in long-term brand value for short-term cost savings worth millions. It was the worst trade in American business history. But here's the deeper lesson. Buck's success is what killed them. When you're on top for so long, you start to believe you deserve to be on top, that your dominance is natural, permanent, inevitable. You stop questioning your assumptions, stop watching for threats, stop evolving with urgency. Buck's leadership saw the California cost pressures, the Chinese competition, the retail consolidation, and they thought these were business problems solvable with business solutions. They were actually identity problems. And identity can't be outsourced. This is how empires fall. Not through one catastrophic mistake, but through 1,000 small compromises that seem insignificant in the moment. Outsource one product line to save costs. Reduce inspection time by 30 seconds. Cut training from 8 weeks to 5. Discount prices to maintain volume. Respond defensively to criticism instead of listening. Individually, none of these decisions would destroy Buck, but collectively, they transformed the company from a standard into a commodity, from an icon into an option, from Buck knives into just knives. And here's the cruelest part. Success hid the failure until it was too late to fix. For years, Buck's financial metrics looked fine. Not great, but acceptable. Revenue was down but stabilizing, costs were controlled, the company was profitable. What the spreadsheets didn't show was that Buck's brand, the intangible asset that can't be measured in quarterly reports, was dying. Customer loyalty was eroding. Cultural relevance was fading. The next generation wasn't buying Buck knives. By the time the financial metrics showed the crisis, it was too late. The brand damage was done. The trust was broken. The empire was already lost. You can't see the cliff when you're watching the speedometer. And the tragedy is that Buck's story is being repeated right now. Different companies, different industries, same pattern. American icon outsources production. Legacy brand struggles to connect with young consumers. Quality complaints surge for former premium brand. Because we never learn. We think our situation is different. Our compromises are justified. Our brand is strong enough to survive outsourcing. Cost-cutting, quality erosion. Buck thought that too. In 1964, Buck created the finest folding knife in American history. A product so good it became a category, so trusted it became a legacy. They built it the right way, the hard way, the only way that creates something permanent. And then, when times got hard, they forgot why it mattered. They chose survival over identity, efficiency over excellence, short-term profit over long-term trust, and they survived. But what they saved wasn't worth what they lost. Buck knives made the best knives in the world. They employed thousands of skilled Americans. They defined quality for 4 generations. They built something that mattered. And in trying to preserve it through compromise, they destroyed the very thing that made it worth preserving. Hoyt Buck believed that if you make something right, people will remember. He was right. We remember what Buck was. We just don't care what they are. The factory still runs. The knives are still made. The Buck name survives. But empires aren't measured by survival. They're measured by what they meant.